Hi, I'm Peter Chan, National Weather Service Program Lead of the Alaska Weather Show, and I have a very important change notice to share with you. The last TV broadcast of the Alaska Weather Show in the traditional sense over the airwaves will be on Saturday, June 30th. Starting on July 1st and thereafter, the National Weather Service will provide a modified web-based version of the program on a new YouTube channel. So that means you'll be able to find us. We'll be moving from @AKwx TV to @NWS Alaska, and you can go ahead and subscribe to that channel now. There will be a public comment period from May 15th through July 30th, so please send your comments or concerns to nws.service-change-comments@noaa.gov. And if you have any other questions, you may reach carrie.haisley at noaa.gov and donald.moore@noaa.gov. Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-855-937-4977. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. Starting off, I wanted to give a brief update on breakup this year. The Tanana River is seeing quite a bit of some open, as well as a lot of the rivers around south central Alaska. Of note, 40 Mile is also broken up at this point, and we are going to start sending out flights to get some eyes on the rivers of the upper Yukon, as well as for the Kuskokwim starting tomorrow. So we'll keep you advised of any changes in the ice that we see from those flights, especially through local radio and on our website. For safety, as we move into breakup time frame, we want to stay safe and be proactive. Move and safeguard property before high water and ice breaks up. Have extra food, batteries, and medical supplies ready. Know your community safety plan and emergency shelter locations, and stay out of floodwaters and ice flows. One of the reasons why we're focusing on this right now is that we are expecting some warmer temperatures later this week, and that is going to aid in getting breakup going as we move later into the week. Looking at our satellite imagery, we have a system that is out over the Aleutians right now, and you can see the front starting to push towards southwest Alaska and Kodiak Island. As you watch this loop again, you can track that front starting to move farther to the east with cloud cover out ahead of that and some lighter showers out over some other areas of mainland Alaska. For our surface map here, we can see that front is pushing into the southeastern portions of the Bering Sea, bringing a mix of rain and snow to southwest Alaska up through much of the Kuskokwim Delta area. Around this low, we're seeing some rain for the central Aleutian Islands, eastern Aleutian Islands, and Alaska Peninsula. Some of those areas are seeing some snow at some of the higher elevations. This is going to be true at Kodiak as well, primarily rain, but some of the snow at some of the higher elevations. Out ahead of this frontal system, we have a lot of southerly flow that are getting squeezed between the ridging out east over southeast Alaska and that front that's pushing closer towards Kodiak. That's bringing a stream of moisture up to south central Alaska, primarily rain for low-lying areas, but we are going to see some snow in some of the mountain areas and up farther into more of the interior locations of south central. Up in the interior, especially in the eastern locations, we're seeing some rain showers, and up in the eastern Brooks Range, that could see some snow up there. Up along the Arctic coastline, we are seeing some areas of fog extending all along the north slope and down through the northwestern portions of the Seward Peninsula. Finally, way down in the Panhandle area, high pressure is dominating the area, keeping most of the area fairly dry, some showers up farther to the north and over Yakutat. Then as we move into tonight, high pressure continuing to dominate southeast Alaska, keeping the area fairly dry with some of the rain off to the east. Our frontal system will, or off to the west rather, our frontal system will have pushed east into much or over the Gulf of Alaska area, and this is bringing more rain and some snow to south central Alaska and some of the eastern locations of the interior. Up along the Arctic coastline and down the west coast, fairly dry, and then down in southwest Alaska, some of the snow is starting to diminish, but we will still have some precipitation down by the Alaska Peninsula. Our low will have tracked to the east and is now near the Alaska Peninsula area, and behind that with some of the northerly winds, we are going to see some more rain for the central and eastern Aleutians. Another system coming in from the west going to start to bring some rain to the western Aleutian Islands for tonight. As we move into Tuesday, that system will have moved out over the western Aleutians, bringing more rain and some snow to areas of the western and central Aleutian Islands. Our other low will have dropped farther to the south, but still bringing some mixed precipitation to the Alaska Peninsula, southwest Alaska, and and to south central Alaska, as our ridging out over southeast has moved slightly to the east, but is still lingering over the area, keeping southeast Alaska fairly dry. Up in the interior, a lot of the showers will have diminished until we get into the Brooks Range, where we'll see some areas of snow. As we move into Wednesday, our frontal system out over the Gulf of Alaska area and low pressure system are staying relatively stationary, continuing to bring some rain throughout the Gulf of Alaska and especially the North Gulf Coast waters for south central down through southwest Alaska. Southeast is hanging onto some ridging, staying fairly dry. Some of the more northern locations going to see potential for some rain, especially as we get by the Yakutat area. In the interior, we are expecting drier conditions, and that's going to be true along the Arctic coastline as well. However, in the morning hours, we do expect some fog all along the Arctic coastline and down into western portions of the Kotzebue Sound. High pressure will have moved in from the west, dominating much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, keeping the area fairly dry and clear for Wednesday. Taking a look at our temperatures, starting with low temperatures on Tuesday in the Panhandle area, dropping down just below 40 degrees for much of the Panhandle. Then in the mid-30s for much of south central Alaska, a little bit colder in the Copper River Basin, down to 33 degrees for Glen Allen and 36 for Kodiak. Tuesday afternoon high is going to get up near 60 degrees for the southern locations of the Panhandle and mid-50s for much of the rest of the area. Yakutat a little bit cooler, only getting up to 49 degrees Tuesday afternoon, and into the lower 50s for much of south central. However, areas nearest to the Gulf are going to stay in the mid-40s, and that's going to be true for Kodiak as well. Wednesday morning going to drop down into the lower 40s for the Panhandle, 38 degrees for Yakutat, near 40 degrees for much of south central Alaska, including Kodiak. However, interior locations such as Glen Allen and Talkeetna dropping down into the lower to mid-30s. Wednesday afternoon going to get up into the mid-50s to upper 50s for the Panhandle, warmer as we get farther to the south, mid-50s for much of south central Alaska. Once again, staying cooler by the water with some of that rain coming in off of the Gulf is going to keep areas like Seward and Whittier a little bit cooler in the mid-40s there, as well as Kodiak. In the interior, temperatures dropping down below freezing for the western interior, staying above freezing for much of the eastern interior. And then moving into Tuesday afternoon highs interior, we are going to get up into the mid-50s for much of the interior locations. And watch this as we move into Wednesday. We are expecting temperatures to continue to warm, aiding in breakup once again up along the Arctic coastline. Afternoon highs for Tuesday are going to get into the mid-20s and staying in the mid-20s for much of the west coast until we get down to the Northern Sound area, getting up to near 40 degrees there. Wednesday morning low is going to drop down near freezing for much of the western and central interior. Eastern interior going to be in the mid-30s, and then in the teens for the Arctic coastline, dropping down to Kotzebue Sound area as well, and in the 20s for much of the Northern Sound area. Wednesday afternoon highs going to get up above 60 degrees for areas in the central and eastern interior, mid-50s for western interior, into the mid-20s along the Arctic coastline, mid to upper 20s for the Kotzebue Sound area, mid to upper 30s to near 40 degrees for areas in the Northern Sound area. Down in southwest Alaska, temperatures going to drop down into the mid-30s, and that's going to be true down in the Alaska Peninsula and much of the Aleutian Islands as well. 30 degrees expected low for St. Paul. Tuesday afternoon highs, southwest Alaska going to get into the mid to upper 40s and lower 40s as we get to the Alaska Peninsula, near 40 degrees for much of the Aleutian Islands and 35 for the Pribilof Islands. Wednesday morning lows are going to drop down into the mid to upper 30s for much of southwest. A little bit colder there as we get closer towards the Yukon Delta, and Macquarie is going down to 29 degrees, mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and then mid-30s continuing for the Aleutian Islands. Pribilof's once again a little bit colder in that northerly flow, going to drop down to 28 degrees Wednesday morning. For our afternoon highs on Wednesday for Southwest, we're going to get into the more interior locations up into the 50s, a little bit warmer there. Near to the water, mid-40s are expected, lower to mid-40s for the Alaska Peninsula, and near 40 degrees for the Aleutian Islands. 35 degrees expected high for St. Paul and St. George.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving into flying weather, we've got pretty good conditions for the southeast coast. Some marginal VFR in the morning. Right along the coastline there, a lot of IFR here for the Gulf of Alaska up to the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and possibly an eastern Turnagain Arm area, and then the eastern 2/3 of the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, maybe some marginal VFR. IFR along areas of the Alaska Range. Interior looking really good, VFR. And then up there to the northeast, some more IFR. But south of the Brooks Range, pretty good. Out in the Bering Sea, not too bad, marginal VFR areas from the Chukchi Sea down into the northern Bering Sea. Get a little more widespread here in the central Bering. And then IFR there for the southeastern Bering Sea into Bristol Bay, north side of the Alaska Peninsula. And then some VFR breaks out in the Aleutians. Then for the afternoon, next system pushes IFR into the western Aleutians here, southwest Bering Sea. More IFR along the Pribilofs and much of the southeastern Bering Sea now, with a little band extending northward there to the Bering Strait. And Seward Peninsula, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, Bristol Bay, marginal VFR, Kuskokwim Valley looks VFR, but the interior looking VFR as well into the Copper River Basin. Marginal VFR for the North Slope with some IFR for the eastern Arctic coast. IFR for the North Gulf Coast into the Barren Islands. Panhandle, not too bad except for some marginal VFR along the coastline. And then for the Wednesday afternoon or Wednesday morning time frame, VFR in the interior. IFR, Bering Sea, right into the Yukon Delta there into Kuskokwim Bay, also sliding into portions of Bristol Bay and north to the Bering Strait, and then back to the west quite a ways there. Most of the Aleutians look marginal at this point. IFR there in the Barren Islands, just east of Kodiak Island, up to the North Gulf Coast again, Prince William Sound, maybe the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range. But the remainder of the range there, VFR into the Copper River Basin and northern Cook Inlet, back to the west and northwest there to the coast up here. Kotzebue, Seward Peninsula, really nice. And Wednesday morning looking pretty good for the Panhandle. The afternoon, about the same. Still possible marginal VFR along the southeast coast. IFR, North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound. And the western Alaska Peninsula in the upslope areas there, western Alaska Range in the upslope areas. North side of the Alaska Peninsula, IFR, about the same pattern here. Narrow band on up to the Bering Strait. IFR for the eastern Arctic coast. And then some more IFR coming in again out over the western Aleutians. For Anaktuvik, marginal VFR for the day on Tuesday. Adigan, same forecast, looks pretty marginal there as well. Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR, rainy, marginal VFR, windy, and Isabel and Matasta, all marginal or all VFR. Tanita, marginal VFR. Portage looks pretty certain it'll be IFR on both entrances. Chilkoot White, though, VFR. Looking at the freezing levels, about 2,000 feet here from the Bering Sea into the interior tomorrow morning. At the surface now, all the way up to the Brooks Range, crossing the Seward Peninsula in the northern Bering, 4,000 feet, Kodiak Island, 4,000 to 8,000 feet across the southeast coast. And from there, looking at icing with the kind of that low dropping east-southeastward here, but the southeast flow carrying some moisture up for possible isolated moderate rime icing for the North Gulf Coast there, Middleton Island, Kenai Peninsula, southern Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island area, but not getting too far north inland. And then the next batch out here to the west, pushing eastward there, maybe to Adak late in the afternoon. And for the jet stream, we've got 150 knots out of the west, just south of Shimian at 2 there, and then kind of dropping off to the southeast as this low pulls more southeastward. But that keeps south and southeast flow up to 70 knots into the North Gulf Coast. And at 9,000 feet, got northeast 40 knots here coming down toward the Pribilof Islands. Otherwise, the stronger winds just south of the western Aleutians. And it looks like southerly winds up to 40 knots coming up into the North Gulf Coast. 3,000 feet, 55 knots out of the southeast into the North Gulf Coast. And as far as turbulence goes, looks like pretty widespread moderate turbulence here for the North Gulf Coast, across southern Alaska, into the Kuskokwim Delta, as well as areas of the central and eastern Aleutians.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining us again, talking about the augmented reality sandbox, is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And he's actually talking about a project from AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. A lot of acronyms, but some really fun stuff today, right, Eric?
You bet. We've got a learning tool that is a tool that's fun to use, and it really has a relevance to actually daily lives of anyone who goes outside and sees lumpy topography in Alaska. We've got a lot of mountains and such. You know, when I was younger and go on your first hike in the hills, say, you're given, maybe you're in the Boy Scouts or you get at the kiosk at the trailhead, a topographic map, a flat piece of paper with all these lines on it, bullseyes, long lines that curve back on themselves, say, perhaps things that look like this, a quadrangle or a topographic map. We've got here just to illustrate a couple of examples near Denali. Alaska has so much topography, so many mountains. And what are all these lines that we see? It can be tough to know what this means the first time you look at it. What we've got, all these lines represent lines of where the elevation of the topography goes through a certain level above sea level. Say that this line represents where the mountains have gone from below 1,000 feet, mean sea level, up through 1,000 feet and above. That's your 1,000-foot contour. And when the mountain keeps going up, you're up to 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, and so on. And that's how you get this little bullseye around the peak of a mountain.
Kind of makes layered slices, right?
Kind of like layered slices. Nice way to look at that. And when you see the lines are closer together, you're going up more steeply. If the mountain rises more slowly, it takes you longer in horizontal space to go through those different vertical increments. So
it's really hard to visualize.
Right. Imagine you're looking at a 2D piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're trying to understand what the three-dimensional world looks like. Well, enter the augmented reality sandbox. Yes, what is that? It is right here. We have the sandbox with us today, Sandbox 2.0, portable version. Sweet. Built up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we've got a couple of folks helping out today.
Let's see, Alana Valaji, and she's a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you want to give us a thumbs up there, Alana, thanks for helping us out today. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator from AKwx, also helping us out today. Thanks, Courtney.
And this tool here has a Microsoft Connect to sense the level of sand in this sandbox. And then the Connect feeds its information into a computer that then sends a signal to a projector to draw the appropriate topographic lines on this topography. The fun thing about this, as we can see here, is that the sandbox and its Connect and its projector, they all work as a team. So here we've got a mountain in the middle of the sandbox. What if we took down the mountain to some degree? Watch as the software responds and redraws the topography.
Kind of a caldera forming there.
There you go, And what's fun about the sandbox, too, is it knows that gravity flows downhill, and we've got some water that's actually down in the lowest elevations. And what's happening now is we're making it rain a little bit. We'll fill up rain into that elevated lake bed, that caldera, as you said. And so now water is pooled up there. And what if you gouged out an outlet channel?
Glacial dam release.
There you go. The water flows out. What we're seeing here is a tool that allows people to touch and connect Microsoft Connect, RRR, to connect two-dimensional topographic maps like what we have here, these flat things on a piece of paper, to the real three-dimensional world. I think this Sandbox's real particular application as a learning tool to young people is, what does a two-dimensional map mean when it's trying to represent the three-dimensional world? This sandbox is kind of both at once. It's actually three-dimensional, lumpy topography there, the sand, but it's got these lines drawn on the three-dimensional sand that would be on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Wow, that is a huge leap from the learning that we experienced when we were younger to how children and even adults are visualizing in this new forms of technology. Allows that to kind of reshape their thinking and visualize this in a very useful and absolutely hands-on way. It's amazing.
It's a hands-on tool, and
it's hard for me to sit here and not go play with that.
Well, that's what happened at GINA up at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks when the first model was being made, the prototype with plywood and such. we had professional adult professor types that heard about this, and they came by because they wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
And everyone becomes that idealistic, wonder-filled youngster.
Sure.
And you just can't help but play with that, and to see how it reacts in time, and
right.
It's a dynamic learning tool, and it responds.
That's exactly the word. Yeah.
And you wonder what applicabilities beyond a teaching tool for topography can it have. You can see how in Alaska we have inundation mapping is an issue. If you had water slosh inland, say in a coastal flooding event on the western coast of Alaska or the Arctic coast, you could see this. The concept is illustrated here as an introductory learning method. I think this is a potentially good outreach tool for all of us in Alaska.
Okay, so not only just a topographical sense, a mapping sense, maybe something that leads into understanding of how geographic information systems work with GIS, but also geology, if we wanted to get into kind of the formations and the bigger land masses and the representation of the 2D map. We could go into hydrology, which is very important in Alaska, of course, and even just understanding weather sense. Mounding up a big pile of sand could be that Arctic high-pressure system sitting on top of Fairbanks, and the voids would be low-pressure systems. This can go a lot of different directions.
Yes, exactly. Wow. It's not just landforms, but pressure has contours of high pressure and low pressure. And I wish I had this kind of a learning tool when I was taking Meteorology 101 back 25 years ago.
Wow.
Would have been helpful, I think.
Probably would have gotten a better grade, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming by, Eric, and Alana and Courtney, thank you so much for your help there in the sandbox. We are going to play in the sandbox a little bit more coming up tomorrow on our next edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, make sure you go to alaska.edu/EPSCOR. That's alaska.edu EPSCOR to learn more information about what we're doing with this augmented reality sandbox around Alaska. We'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Facts. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. We'll take a quick look at our sea ice edge. We do have down by the Kuskokwim Delta area, some of our short, fast ice is starting to erode a lot faster, especially near the edge. As we move up to the Yukon Delta and out towards Gullivan area, we do have some water starting to form on the ice, as we are starting to see some melting, especially near the coastline. And then on Tuesday for southeast Alaska, in the inside waters, we're looking at southeast winds 10 knots. Out over the Gulf waters, we're looking at southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, picking up to 35 knots in the northern portions of the Gulf, seas up to 15 feet. On Wednesday in the inside waters, primarily southeast 15 to 20 knots, but inland canal we are expecting northerly winds 15 knots. Out over the Gulf waters, southeast winds 25 knots. As we get closer to Yakutat, we are expecting some gusts up to 35 knots, and then northern Gulf we're going to see sustained winds 35 knots out of the east. On Tuesday for south central Alaska in the Gulf waters, we are seeing easterly winds 30 to 35 knots, a little bit stronger by the Barrens, up to as high as 40 knots there. Prince William Sound 25 knots out of the east, and then Cook Inlet up north we're going to see 25 knots out of the northeast, and then 35 knots as we move farther to the south. On Wednesday out over the Gulf waters we're going to see primarily easterly winds 40 to 45 knots, and then 25 knots in Prince William Sound also out of the east. Northeast winds over Cook Inlet, still weaker up north, 25 knots there, getting precise 35 knots as we get closer towards Kamishak Bay. Then on Tuesday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, strongest winds are going to be through Shelikof Strait, northeast winds 30 knots there, 15 knots out of the southeast on the other side of the island, and then all around the Alaska Peninsula, weaker winds variable around 10 knots. Bristol Bay can see winds up to 15 knots out of the east. On Wednesday, picking up quite a bit for areas around the Alaska Peninsula, north to northeast winds 25 to 30 knots expected. Strongest winds once again are going to be by Shelikof Strait and areas exiting out of there, 35 to 40 knots, 12 feet seas through Shelikof Strait itself, and then on the eastern side of Kodiak Island, 30 knots out of the east. Tuesday, we're going to see winds primarily out of a north to northeast direction for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, 25 to 30 knots there. And they switch direction quite a bit out of a southeasterly direction for the western Aleutian Islands, 25 to 30 knots expected. Wednesday, we're going to see winds out of a more northerly direction for the western Aleutian Islands, Islands, 15 to 20 knots. Northerly winds 25 to 30 knots for the central Aleutians, and then northwest winds 30 to 35 knots for the eastern Aleutian Islands. Down the west coast, northerly winds are expected 20 to 25 knots. Highest seas are going to be by the Pribilof Islands, up to as high as 10 feet there. Wednesday, we're going to see northerly winds continuing 20 to 25 knots in most areas. Farther to the south, we are going to see winds picking up towards 30 knots out by the Pribilof Islands as well as in Bristol Bay. For our Tuesday forecast for the Arctic coast, we're going to see weaker winds along much of the north slope, only around 10 knots at variable directions, and down the west coast picking up a little bit, 15 to 20 knots there, highest as we get farther to the south. On Wednesday, still pretty light winds along the northwest portion of the Arctic coast, but becoming more easterly, 10 to 15 knots as we get closer towards the Baltic Sea. Down the west coast, northerly winds 10 to 15 knots, and they get up to 20 knots south of the Bering Strait. Recap of tonight's weather. We do have a low that is slowly moving east and southeast by the eastern Aleutian Islands, and that's going to push up front through southwest Alaska and the Gulf of Alaska, bringing some rain to the Aleutian Islands, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and south central. Some of the areas in south central will see some snow, especially at higher elevations and areas farther inland. Meanwhile, down in southeast, we do have high pressure dominating the area. That's kind of stalling out our front over the Gulf. And then in the interior, eastern locations, you're going to see some snow showers, but pretty dry for much of the western interior, west coast, and Arctic coastline. Way out west, we have another system coming in towards the western Aleutian Islands. That's going to bring some rain to the area. One of the things that we do want to note is that we do expect warmer temperatures throughout much of the later portions of this week that are going to start to aid in breakup for many of the rivers around the interior, south central, and southwest. We do have flights going out to monitor the upper Yukon and upper Kuskokwim starting tomorrow. And we have some open water in some of the areas around south central rivers, the Tanana River, and 40 Mile is already broken up. Taking a look at our weather for Tuesday, our low pressure system out by the western Aleutian is going to bring in some rain to the islands. We still have rain coming into south central Alaska, southwest, and the Alaska Peninsula. Once again, at some of the higher elevations, we still could see some snow. High pressure is going to hang on for southeast Alaska, keeping most of the area fairly dry through Tuesday. Then up in the interior, we are expecting to see some drier conditions. Brooks Range could see some snow, and then dry once again as we get along the Arctic coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.